We are live. It's week 14, an important week. Maybe it's the first week of your playoffs. Maybe it's the week that decides the seeding, the matchups in first week of your playoffs next week, as we're adjusting to an 18-week season. NFL's adjusting to an 18-week season. Luckily, we've got Chris Allen here to help with start-sit questions, and Chris and I will both pepper Dr. Jene Bramel. We've got extra questions for you, Gene, because you weren't here on Thursday. That's your punishment. Really, it's the NFL that comes up with extra questions for you. Let's start with the cover boy for your game day start sits again. Game day start sits. Game day injury expectations. Again, if you're a subscriber to Football Guys, you get all the information straight from the brain of Dr. Gene. But what about Joe Mixon? It wasn't a brain, wasn't maybe even the neck. Maybe it was just the illness keeping him out of practice. Should he be any hesitation about putting him in lineups today?
I don't think so. The reporters locally were saying that he was on the sideline for practice on Friday, which suggests that he was feeling well enough that he wasn't in a huge hurry to rehydrate himself, trying to get some additional rest. And there lots of indications that the injury last week was mild, as you said, but also that the illness was mild. And if he had close to 72 hours to rehydrate and recover, you'd expect him to be able to do just fine today. San Francisco is going to be dealing with the loss of a couple of cornerbacks that they weren't expecting to be missing as well. So I don't think there's going to be much issue with Mixon. If there is, and the Bengals get out to a little bit of a lead, then you'd expected him to have been a part of that already anyway. So I think he's good to go.
So, Gene, with Deebo Samuel expected to play this week, coming off with a groin injury, now he's missed a couple of games. I mean, any chance for a setback like mid-game, chance of re-aggravation? I mean, what should folks expect with him coming back this week?
Yeah, I don't really like the fact that he's only had one practice over the couple of weeks since that injury. Now, in the beginning, it was suggested it was going to be mild, was going to take a week or two to rehab, which was reassuring. But for him to not practice on Thursday and Wednesday and then be able to do a little bit on Friday, that didn't really sound all that promising. But Adam Schefter just flat said last night that he was going to play. Ian Rappaport's been a little bit more hedgy in the sense that they maybe want to look at him in pregame warmups, but the expectation is that he's going to go. And Samuel has had some experience already playing through this injury this year and then playing through a similar injury a couple of years ago. I don't know that they're going to use him on many designed runs as they have before, and I don't know how many targets he's likely to get necessarily. But the way it looks right now is looks like he's going to go. So, I'll let you guys kind of discuss what the state of the wide receiver position looks like, but I think you can trust that he's going to be in for at least half the snaps, get a fair number of targets. I don't know if he's going to be the yards after catch or after run threat that he's been throughout the season, but I think it's going to be kind of hard to leave him out of lineups. But yeah, there's definitely a risk of aggravation. You could easily see this go sideways, but allowing him to talk to the media on Friday and then getting back to practice and Schefter's, just kind of matter of fact note is pretty reassuring.
Gene, we're getting a lot of questions about Jeff Wilson. And and by the way, on Deebo, we'll talk about wide receiver. Wide receiver's rough streets out there. And Deebo definitely gives you that fear of missing out. So I'm not going to tell anyone to bench Deebo. I might not urge everyone to play him, but it's tough to put him on the bench. And Deebo figures into the picture with Jeff Wilson, who had that knee flare up, which sounds scary considering that he hasn't really looked like himself being pre-2021 Jeff Wilson. How should we weigh his maybe ability to play through the game, his workload, as I think the backup running back today will be JaMychal Hasty and maybe Brian Hill? What advice can you give us on Wilson?
That's a tough one too. I think the Samuel and the Wilson situations may be just suggesting that the Niners, although they have a relatively favorable schedule coming in, know that they need to win games to make the playoffs. There's a couple of spots available, and they want to get into one of those. So that, they're going to do is whatever they can to get their players on the field. I don't feel great about Wilson. I was surprised on Wednesday and Thursday that things were trending as optimistically as they seem to have finally done. It was said that he was going to just need a couple of days off, but he wasn't on the injury report at all, only managed 2 snaps. Mitchell was dealing with multiple things last week and came back after a head injury check, and Wilson really wasn't involved, and Hasty wasn't involved that much either. So, it's a little bit suspicious to me that he's gone from a knee flare that keeps him off the field altogether to return to full practice Thursday, Friday, not listed on the injury report at all, and everybody very comfortable saying that he's going to start and that Hasty is going to be a complimentary piece there. So hard to suggest that he's going to be able to take the 20 to 25 touches that we'd seen Mitchell take when he's been healthy, and trying to predict what Shanahan's going to do in some situations. The first week when there's a new situation that we're unsure of is difficult. But I think the intention going into the game is that Wilson is probably going to be in the 15 to 18 touch range if they can get him there, and he's got that sort of upside. Whether or not that's still the case halfway through the fourth quarter is a different question. But I think that seems to be everybody's understanding of what the intention is going to be, though.
So another running back with another lower leg, or I guess this one actually is a knee injury. So Alvin Kamara coming off of the MCL sprain. It sounded like he was able to get in a full practice throughout most of this week. It also sounded like he was pretty close to playing last week. So do you have less concern about Kamara as compared to the other running backs we just discussed?
Yeah, I'm not worried about Kamara at all. I think Kamara was probably going to play last week, and then you could tell that the tone of the local writers shifted just a little bit, and it wasn't all that surprising that he wasn't able to go on Thursday night despite that full week of limited practice. And then both Sean Payton and Kamara are hinting that there was some sort of hamstring issue toward the end of last week that they didn't put on the injury report then. They didn't put on the injury report now. And no, Kamara has not been back to a full practice yet, but I think we're far enough away from the MCL sprain. He's had a couple of good weeks of limited practice now. If the hamstring tweak was kind of a Wednesday afternoon situation, you could see why, well, they're probably not going to add it to the injury report. He was listed questionable already, and it really turned out to not to be an issue, especially 10 days later. Mark Ingram is on the COVID list. Ty Montgomery's on the COVID list. No one really knows for certain exactly how Taysom Handle is going to handle targets to Kamara. And the passing game has been the same thing that we've seen with other quarterbacks in the past in New Orleans, but this is a setup for 20 touches immediately, and they may even lean on him more heavily than that if he gets some touches in the passing game as well.
All right, Gene. This is kind of a Thelma and Louise moment. The question is, do you grab Julio Jones' hand and let's drive over the week 14 cliff together and whatever happens, happens? Or should we know better by now? And even if it's an option like, I don't know, Jamison Crowder, somebody that is going to be at least a core part of a passing game, then you leave Julio on the bench.
Yeah, I mean, we're not driving over the cliff. He's already got 1 foot over it still, even though he's been on injured reserve and theoretically healthy enough to come back. I think the only reason that you consider Julio Jones is there are zero playmakers of any sort on Tennessee's offense altogether. So they're going to use him and they're going to target him until they can't anymore. Is that 10 snaps in? Is it 60 snaps in? It's hard to know. So I think there's definitely upside there. He did look good in practice and drills, moving pretty well, but that's not a game situation. 3 weeks is probably not enough to solve this issue. It's been going on for 2 years. So yeah, at some point, I think Julio is going to be of concern where we may not see him on the field anymore. But I don't know that I would say that they're rushing him back here necessarily, but I also don't feel comfortable until we see him get through a full week without having to have limited practice reps the following week, that he can comfortably take 60 snaps and run 40 routes and get double-digit targets.
So would you feel the same? I guess it's a different situation with T. Higgins, right? Because he wound up being able to finish last week's game, missed a practice earlier in this week, if I'm remembering correctly. So with his projected workload for this week, do you think he sees less snaps, sees a similar workload as we've seen over the past month or so? What are your expectations for T?
I think he's going to be okay. It was a horse collar tackle that caused the injury. Generally, those put players at risk for high ankle sprain, but that's not really what I saw on video. So I don't expect that to be the case. Back to practice on Thursday and fully practicing. They did list him questionable as they did a few other folks. I don't think that there's going to be much limitation. Some risk of aggravation, some risk of what we said with, maybe that the Bengals are in a good spot in the passing offense this week with those cornerbacks down as well. So I don't have too much concern about Higgins. I think he's going to be able to see his usual workload, but lots of targets to spread around there in Cincinnati.
All right, let's keep going. We got more, Gene. Judging by the questions I'm getting in the chat room, it seems like maybe folks are a little bit worried about Chase Edmonds coming back tomorrow night, because I would think that James Conner is a slam dunk must start. You must have a pretty stacked running back room to even consider putting Conner on the bench. But what say you?
I didn't like the tone of Cliff Kingsbury's comments on Saturday after practice. So by one token. So we're working under the framework that Arizona has shown us that they're going to be cautious with their very important offensive pieces. They took some extra time with Kyler Murray. They clearly took some extra time with DeAndre Hopkins so that when they did come back, although they had a week of limited practices, they really weren't limited on the field at all. And now neither one of them are even on the injury report. They're not even to the point where they feel like they need to manage practice reps. Now that may change toward the end of the year, but for them not to be on the injury report at all this week tells you that they were probably closer to returning even a little bit earlier than last week. So, as you said, James Conner is playing well. Chase Edmonds had a fairly significant high ankle sprain. He was in drills, but Howard Belzer is telling us that he really wasn't any live action reps necessarily. And Kingsbury on Saturday after practice said he's going to be a game time decision and we'll see. That's not really the tone of what you'd want to hear. But all that said, if he is active, you think that would mean that he's capable of coming back and getting 12 to 15 touches immediately as he has before. I just don't think we're going to know until Monday afternoon. The Cardinals don't have to make a decision until 4 o'clock on Monday. We may or may not get a little bit of information tonight, overnight, but it's not coming before you have to make decisions today. So unless you've got some sort of reasonable hedge for Monday night, I don't know that you leave Connor in the lineup, and for that, or Edmonds in the lineup, and then for that reason, I think you probably can be pretty trustworthy that Connor's going to get 10 to 15 touches at minimum, and then all of the goal line work as he was before. So hard to know. I don't know if you guys have a different read on that situation or not, but I was expecting a little bit more positivity from Kingsbury after Saturday's practice if he was going to be active and play.
All right, so Dr. Gene, we got 3 fingers that we have to try and think about this week. And I know that sounds funny. Now that I think about it, Taysom Hill's finger, Russell Wilson's finger, and then we've also got who also has Joe Burrow's pinky. Yeah, Joe Burrow's pinky. So between all those 3 quarterbacks, sounds like Russ is the one that I'd be the most optimistic about. So what say you?
Agree. Yeah, I agree with that. I think we're past the point where we need to be too worried about Russell Wilson. That's more of a overall team offensive question. It looked like maybe things were trending in a good direction for that passing offense, but it's play calling, it's chemistry, it is sustaining drives, it's all of those things that's an issue for Wilson way more than his finger at this point. I feel pretty good about Burrow. He's tough. He fought through the injury last week, didn't look great at times. It was clearly still limiting him. But, once the swelling and the range of motion improves a little bit, and every dislocated finger is a little bit different, and the pinky is important. But back to practice on Thursday, fully practice on Friday, was past the point where he was trying to mess around with, is this glove going to feel okay? Is that tape job okay? What am I going to do? Splint, all that sort of stuff is a non-issue. He was throwing without too much issue, without any of that stuff on Friday. So, quarterbacks in the pocket will bang their hands on anything and everything, from handoffs to follow-throughs to sacks, and that's how it happened in the first place. Thankfully, the Bengals are getting a couple of their relatively important offensive linemen back this week. Hopefully, they protect him a little bit better. I'm not too worried about Burrow. Taysom Hill, he's going to play through it. He's not really a passing quarterback necessarily anyway. Right? Yeah. So, we're not looking for Hill to be driving the ball downfield 30, 40, 50 yards to whatever receiver is there at this point anyway. So that's going to be a mix of a short passing game and RPOs and design runs and that sort of stuff. And, that finger is not going to be a major issue. It's not going to be comfortable, but, he's not a 75% accuracy quarterback anyway. That's not what you're looking for. So yes, it's a concern, but not so much where I feel like he's on the verge of being removed from the game, unless there's some sort of setback that occurs where he physically can't throw the ball. We're in a situation where the Saints have to do what the Patriots did last week, which is run the ball on all but 3 offensive touches.
All right. A good question brought up in the chat room that I just sometimes, Gene, something gets in the corner of your radar, and I want to just get your initial reaction to this because it was brought up in the chat room. Should we be worried, or I guess this is not really something that appeals to your expertise, but it's just something because you're such a sober, level-headed person about this stuff. Should folks be worried about Sony Michel going on the COVID list before tomorrow night because Darrell Henderson tested positive?
Yeah. I think that's a possibility right now. It's pretty clear. I don't think the NFL is specifically releasing this information, but there are staged protocols for COVID processes this year. And early in the year, if teams were vaccinated, if there wasn't any sort of amount of spread in the locker room at all, players that were vaccinated, if they weren't symptomatic, were tested on Monday, and that was it. But the reason we're hearing about so many tests moving forward is because many of these teams have enough spread that the processes have kicked in where there's a heightened amount of testing, those protocols throughout the week. So on any given day, if anybody has symptoms, they could be tested, or if they're unvaccinated and they're getting tested a little bit more often, that could be an issue too. So yeah, I think that's a concern in lots of different places. It's not just Sony Michel, but in all of these position groups where we're starting to see players test positive, close contact wise or not. It's just, we're full community spread right now. And at any given point where we are, I'm not aware. I need to go back and look. I'm not certain that there are game day testing protocols unless players are symptomatic. So hard to know right now. But yeah, I think so. It's where we are right now. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any way getting around it. I'm pretty sure that there were a couple of folks that were added to the list late yesterday afternoon. There are some Sunday morning tests for players that are still in protocol. So tough to say. I think it's possible. Hopefully unlikely.
Didn't the same thing happen with the Broncos backfield with Mike Boone
Right.
being on the COVID list? But we don't really have that same concern.
I was babbling a little bit longer there because I had put another situation just like that in yesterday's article, and my old man brain couldn't remember who it was. It's Melvin Gordon. So the same concern I had that we're talking about for Monday night, I did have with Melvin Gordon through the weekend. It does not appear to be an issue. I think we would have heard about that by 8 a.m. this morning. Those tests usually get done by 7 o'clock and they're turned around pretty quickly. But yes, that was what I was trying to recall while I was chatty a little bit there, was the same situation there.
But what about Melvin Gordon's hip and then also the shoulder injury I believe he's coming off of? So
Hip,
if
yeah.
it's not the COVID possibility, is he still going to be able to play today?
I think so. Vic Fangio said hopeful, and Melvin Gordon was talking like he was going to play. And I was wrong last week. I thought the shoulder was the primary issue, but I had forgotten that it was the shoulder that was on the injury report for a couple of weeks rather than the hip. So the hip is a new deal. Back at practice, seems to be successfully recovering from that injury. I think Javonte Williams has pretty much proven that he is the lead back there now. I don't think we're going back to the split that you were seeing before, what Gordon was dealing with over these last couple of weeks. But yeah, I do expect him to at least be active. Probably will cut into Williams' production a little bit, but not significantly so.
All right. I think we've touched on most of the major injury situations that are going to affect lineups today, Gene. There are a few others, and we'll see with inactives, guys like Tony Pollard plays Zeke. I mean, his knee is not great, but he's going to get a ton of touches.
I think if you're looking at the Cowboys backfield, I think it's probably better if Pollard rests one more week and they allow, did he get a cortisone shot? Is there something else that they were doing to try to manage him through this week? The Cowboys don't seem to care, though. They're going to put players out there regardless of where they are injury wise.
You mean Jerry doesn't seem to care?
Well, that's where we are. I mean, somebody stepped in and say, look, CD Lamb is not playing. But in almost every other situation, you've seen these guys come back kind of on the edge of their timetable. Maybe not every single offensive lineman was in that situation, but yeah. So I think if I was hopeful that Pollard was going to be productive for me in weeks 15 through 17, I would like to not take the risk of an aggravation. And, there's lots of questions this week about what does a plantar fascia tear mean? Is it actually better if it's fully torn? The answer to that is yes, but it's not yes in 5 days. So either way, you would probably hope that, he takes a little bit of time off, has some rehab, doesn't have any aggravations along the way so that he's ready to go. But yeah, I'd be surprised if he's active today. And if he is, it could be a Darrell Henderson situation like last week where he's on the active roster because they didn't really have anybody else to promote. And maybe they use him if they absolutely have to, but I just don't see him getting his usual touches and targets if he's on the active list today.
Okay, so I'm going to give you one last question for the savvy people out there, because I know that the only savvy people subscribe to Football Guys, listen to the Audible, tune into our YouTube channel, like, comment, subscribe. For those savvy people, maybe folks who don't need a win today or folks that are looking at the last spot on their bench, rank these three for the likelihood of helping us by week 17, okay? We've got 2 Browns, Antonio and AJ, and Adam Thielen. Rank them for the likelihood of helping us before the end of the season.
I don't know if we're going to see Antonio Brown back at this point. So there's enough rumblings from what the Tampa Bay folks are saying that maybe he's not going to be welcome back in the building even after the suspension. I do think he's going to be ready there. So that was a 3-game suspension. It's 13, 14, 15. Yeah. So he'd be 16 and 17, right? He's not in the building in rehab right now. They don't necessarily know what they're going to get when he comes back. I don't know that you're going to see him fully healthy in week 16. So you're hopeful that you get a full strength Antonio Brown in 17, and I'm just not sure. I think A.J. Brown, I think the injury that he has is such that he's probably going to be ready as soon as he comes back. And hopefully that offense is putting some pieces together so that by the time he gets there, he's okay. Thielen's injury is a harder answer. He's going to be right on the cusp. So we've seen these high ankle sprains. If they were worried enough about him, did he go on injured reserve? He didn't actually, did he? No. So, Thielen probably a week ahead of Brown, right around the same time. I think he'd be there, unless something changes and we just don't hear good things about him this week. So I think Thielen and Brown are kind of in the same area. And that ask me that same question next week. I know people are planning ahead. I think both of them are where they need to be so that they can help you in 16 and 17. I don't think I would put much hope into Antonio Brown at this point. Look at that as a Christmas bonus if you get him back for week 17.
I saw this one in the chat. Any rumblings about Derrick Henry? Any chance he comes back?
Yeah, all that rumbling today was because Ian Rappaport put a note that said his rehab was progressing as hoped and he'd have a chance. He's not going to be back in 17. This is what they're hoping for, is that they maintain their spot in the playoffs. He's healthy enough to contribute to them in some way and hopefully fully come playoff time. Now, that playoff time for them might extend to week 18. If that is a win and in game, then they may push him to come up sooner. But he's not playing in week 17. He's not going to help for the fantasy season at this point, but he's likely to have some role that looks like it's confirmed now, as long as he continues to progress and do well in rehab.
The rumbling you hear is your team rolling over the competition, at least with some help from Dr. Jene and guiding us through all these injury situations, which seem to multiply like the heads of Hydra as we get deeper into the season. We're so lucky to have you to guide us between a rock and a hard place, Dr. Jene. Always thanks.
I appreciate it, guys. Have a wonderful week.
You too.
Yep.
All right. Woo. All right. Well, Chris, there's lots of start sits, although a lot of them involve some of the players. I want to talk about something a little more general. Boy, there are a lot of people that are hard up at running back this week, just judging by the running back questions I'm getting.
Yeah.
So I'll start here, and I haven't got this specific question, but this question implicates a lot of other questions. If you had to pick one of the two Detroit running backs, Godwin Igwebuike, gotta remember, I think Donald Igwebuike is his uncle. Godwin Igwebuike or Jamar Jefferson is a Hail Mary here. Which Detroit running back would you guide people to?
I think it's Igwebuike for me, just because of his usage in the passing game. Like if you're sitting there in a half-point PPR league or PPR league, I mean, that's the only reason why I would lean more towards him, because both of them have shown to be at least fairly decent from a rushing perspective so far. And it's not like we were really, I guess, leaning towards either of them, or at least the Detroit backfield as a whole, outside of DeAndre Swift, like for their rushing production. Right. So if you're looking for any of the two to try and like throw up a prayer and say, hey, get me 7, 8, 9 points this week, right? I mean, that's really what you're trying to at least get out of either of the two. That's who I lean. I lean more towards Godwin at this point.
Okay. Now, and this is like an equation we're building, okay? What about the Jets with no Tevin Coleman this week? If you had to pick between Ty Johnson and Austin Walter, which one would you pick?
See, they've been going more towards Austin Walter, but prior to, even before this season, I thought Ty Johnson had like the inside track at the very least being the number 2. Like after they picked up Michael Carter, I was like, okay, fine. Like why Ty Johnson is more of a raw player, like in terms of that athleticism, like in terms of also being a pass catcher out of the backfield. I thought at least the tools were there in order for them to develop him in order to be a more solid RB2, like just behind Michael Carter. But even still, Tevin Coleman got into the mix and started ahead of him. Now Austin Walter has now like come into our lives. So I think the Jets have kind of signaled how they think Ty Johnson is like to their backfield. So I think just from those movements, from those signals from the team, I have to lean Walter at this point, even though I believe like Ty Johnson is the better player, at least athletically speaking.
Okay, now, and this one should be, I think it's a volleyball spike, but I just want to make sure. Should we even include, Ryan Skelly brought this up in the chat room, should we even include the Chuba Hubbard, Amir Abdullah discussion with the Detroit Jets discussions in terms of uncertainty, or is there certainty here?
I don't think there's certainty, but I think if you take any of the last couple of weeks' comments regarding Matt Rule and their desire to run the ball a bit more, I mean, you would probably go ahead and lean more towards Chuba Hubbard anyway. Like I get Amir Abdullah was mixing more in on passing downs, like shortly after Christian McCaffrey went down again, there was more of a workload split. But if they were going to try and ride either of the two, and rush more, like outside of Cam Newton, who do you think is going to be the one to see the
Right.
more opportunities from that perspective? So I think Hubbard at least should have the inside track like for that. And given who they're going up against like today, I think that either of the two can be viable, but I lean more towards Hubbard.
Yeah, and I think that so let's just put a little cap on this one. Amir Abdullah versus the Jets backs versus the Detroit backs for somebody that, again, that hit that Hail Mary, who's likely to come down with the ball in the end zone and win the game?
I would say that Abdullah most likely, just given the defenses that they're going up against. I mean, can we really expect anybody to produce well against the Saints offense? I think they've allowed a 100-yard rusher at all this season,
except against the Eagles. The Eagles just rolled over them. I have no idea what happened in that game.
Yeah, but outside of that, it's like but that's been the case for years going up against New Orleans. So I think given the defensive matchups, I lean more towards Abdullah just because, of course, he can be the one to catch a few dump offs. I mean, he could wind, and especially going against Atlanta's defense, he could be the one to be the most productive.
And in general, I like to put things this way because there's so many questions. And great turnout. By the way, folks, it's a real joy and pleasure to get to serve you all on this Sunday morning. Over 300 in the chat room, and love seeing the way the chat room helps each other out too. Are you more likely to say yes or no when Jeff Wilson is in a question this week?
Depends on who the other person is. I think it's
so. I mean, is he clearly above those 5 backs we were just talking about?
I think from an opportunity standpoint, yes. Deebo Samuel throws a wrench into the plans, but with what Dr. Jene was saying, if we do have a concern about the risk of aggravation for the groin injury, I mean, what's more likely to see that happen? Like if he winds up getting used out of the backfield, like he was over the past few weeks without Elijah Mitchell in the lineup, without really being able to use Jeff Wilson as they wanted to when he came back from injury, at least it gives me some pause in saying that Kyle Shanahan is just going to use him the same way that he was like in weeks prior, where it's just, see if you can take some of those toss plays, see if you can take some of those stretch plays, like take it to the edge and see if you can wind up getting outside. I just don't see that happening. I think I know better, and I think I know how Kyle Shanahan is going to deploy, which is probably like famous last words. But if you were going to try and deploy Deebo Samuel while also trying to minimize the risk of re-aggravation, you would do it so as a receiver, and then use Jeff Wilson as you had prior to. But I think on the flip side to that, with Jeff Wilson also having the knee flare-up concerns at the earlier parts of the week, I think from an opportunity standpoint, you could at least look at 10 touches, which with the running backs that we've already discussed right now, 10 to 15 touches in an efficient offense like San Francisco, who is most likely going to get pulled into at least something of a back and forth with Cincinnati, considering San Francisco's defensive injuries so far. I think you couldn't ask for at least a more positive game environment for Jeff Wilson, but I think it's just the injuries that put a damper on the whole thing.
And again, I'll reveal my own thinking about this, but I think this is a player that clearly doesn't belong in this discussion, even though I'm seeing him mentioned in questions with some of these running backs, someone that I'm much more confident in. I'm confident enough, and like you say, the opponent matters here. I'm confident enough to say D'Onta Foreman is a pretty good running back to start today, but what do you say, Chris?
I think so, yeah, because I have more confidence in Foreman than I do Hilliard. Because I think if Tennessee still has playoff aspirations, and like we were just talking about with Dr. Jene about, at best, Derrick Henry comes back and resumes his role once they get into the playoffs. If the team has continued to at least play in a similar way that they had when Henry was in, and they have, at least from a rushing standpoint, I think the play action rate has been down for Ryan Tannehill, but if they continue to be who they are so far, who has been the guy that looks the most like Derrick Henry, from a rushing perspective, how he runs, his style. I mean, even just I would say, while he doesn't look the same as Derrick Henry on the field, but D'Onta Foreman is a pretty big dude, in his own right. So I think overall, I think Foreman shapes up to be the better runner between the two. And especially this week, I mean, with them going up against Jacksonville.
Right.
Yeah, I think Foreman is the best bet out of that.
Yeah, and coming off the bye. And Shirley Shapiro asked in the chat room about Cam Akers, and that more of a next year question, but what D'Onta Foreman is doing right now should give you a lot more confidence. And Kenny Nwangwu, by the way, both of those guys coming all the way back.
Marlon Mack too.
Marlon Mack Achilles tears. So I'm interested to see what the free agent market does with Marlon Mack. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
let's get some temperature checks on a few other players. Okay, and then we can maybe get into some individual start sit questions. But I think the temperature checks are good to help guide people. Okay, and when I say temperature check, it's just like cold, cool, lukewarm, warm, hot.
Mhm.
Where are we on Jalen Guyton with Keenan Allen sitting out this week?
I would say lukewarm. I think that it comes down to what Mike Williams expected to play, but it's just what is that workload going to be between the three of them? What's that deployment going to look like? Because while Jalen Guyton has been more of the, let's say, the quote unquote like wind sprinter out of the three or even four of them when Keenan Allen has been active, Josh Palmer has been the one to have like the larger snap rate like between the three of them as well. But we also saw Jalen Guyton be the one to get that deep shot from Justin Herbert just this past week. So there's always that chance for an explosive play. We're now removing an explosive player from that offense in Keenan Allen. So I think Jalen Guyton, especially the fact that they're going up against the Giants, at wide receiver ones against the Giants have struggled a bit. But you wind up seeing the ancillary options in that passing attack also get out? Yeah. So I think there's at least a lukewarm feeling like towards him, but it's just who else they're going to turn to. Because you got Austin Eckler, you've got Jared Cook, you've got like with the Chargers offense. So I'd say if you're starting him, I have no pushback on the situation at all. It's just we can see those targets go to any of them. And Austin Eckler probably the biggest one though.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Cowboys offense, where there's because you're putting Justin Herbert in your life. And this is one, by the way, on the wide receiver tight end decisions, folks. And again, I always hit this kind of note at this point in the season, Chris. If it's week 14 and you're listening to this show right now, you're hanging out with us at YouTube, you're poring over your decisions, you're still interested in your fantasy football team, then you've absorbed a lot of knowledge this year already yourself. So don't just substitute our judgment for your own. But one of the things I like to use when I'm unsure on a wide receiver or tight end decision is you brought up one good thing in the matchup, and we can get more specific on the matchup because just on the Guyton question, like you said, actually James Bradbury is a pretty good matchup for good in the sense that James Bradbury can match a lot of the things that Mike Williams can do. There's similar kinds of athletes, length, physicality. And that does point to me, like you said, to one of the ancillary options. Eckler's a little banged up. So and one of the other reasons I like Guyton is that catch he made against the Bengals last week should build trust. Yes. You don't think of Jalen Guyton as a 50-50 ball guy. Justin Herbert hung one out there that was 5 to 10 yards underthrown when Guyton was clear, wide open on that wind sprint, as you put it. And Guyton was able to adjust and make a big play. So I also like the momentum of the player, but always think about the quarterback. And someone was asking me a question earlier that involved Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I can't remember who the other choice was, but it was a question like, okay, well, yeah, I want to get Aaron Rodgers in my lineup. I want to get Justin Herbert in my lineup. And that's a good way, I think, to think about these things. I don't know if it's going to apply to this particular one it's a little bit of a jarring switch because the quarterback might make you think to play this player, but the matchup might not. What's your temperature check? Are you overthinking it, basically, if you're considering putting Nuke Hopkins on your bench against Jalen Ramsey tomorrow night?
I think you are overthinking it because Ramsey hasn't shadowed or at least been that dominant corner, at least from that perspective. Like I think he's still been at least a force like on that team, but it's just with him moving around, them being able to essentially use him in that like old like monster position, like from like Pop Warner football, where it's just play anywhere you want. And just continue to just dominate the field. So if he's not really playing that shadow like corner like type of position like as he had in years past, yeah, I think like DeAndre Hopkins is a fine start this week. I mean, we saw him immediately come out, like both him and Kyler come out, even just in the limited snaps that Hopkins played last week. Also seeing him on not just short, quick passes, but the long pass or the long touchdown they wound up catching last week. So at least we're over the injury concerns. Yeah, I would start DeAndre Hopkins like tomorrow as well.
Yeah, well, and we get down to this point in the fantasy football season, Chris, and it really does come down to I'm going to channel Cecil. Who do you trust? Who do you trust?
Yeah,
and it's I also called it the what can you live with test. I can live with losing because I played Nuke. I can't live with losing because I didn't play Nuke. how do we guide folks that are considering Taysom Hill this week?
If you're starting Taysom Hill, my guess is that you're probably left with very few options out there on the waiver wire.
Right.
I mean, unless you were debating between, let's say, if you picked up Taysom Hill when Russell Wilson was going through like his bouts, right? I think that would be about the only other situation I think that might be viable, like for people to have like Taysom Hill on their bench and considering, or have them on their roster, considering starting them. But yeah, like Dr. Gene was pointing out, and like we all agreed, you're not starting Taysom Hill in order to be the 300-yard passer. Like you're starting him to be like the mobile quarterback that he was that we just saw this week. I mean, 4 interceptions and 27 points. And now he's going up against the Jets. I mean, 31st, 32nd in EPA per play allowed. I mean, that defense has been giving it up to literally everybody. Now, while I think the problematic portion for starting Taysom Hill, and we just saw this last week with Philadelphia, is can the Jets put up enough fight for Taysom Hill to continue producing like throughout the second half? Or do we just wind up seeing, let's say, more attempts to Alvin Kamara? Or even if they have concern about Alvin Kamara, do we see Tony Parker or something like that, or Tony Jones, or like whomever the backup
right.
Or that sort of scenario where they just take their foot off the gas in the second half after getting up quite a bit, considering the Jets just lost Elijah Moore. So I think that's really the only concern with Taysom Hill, is that there's just not enough incentive for the Saints to continue pushing the ball offensively after they get up, let's say 2-3 scores. But at the very least, if we know that they were able to get up 2 to 3 scores, Hill should be a significant part of that, because it's not like we're looking at any of the wide receiver options, or at least or anything outside of the running back options in terms of versus outside of Alvin Kamara for production on the ground. So yeah, I think you're starting Taysom Hill and just like hoping that they continue to press the gas like even after they get up.
But you, like you said, you started with Hill Wilson. I would say go with Russell Wilson there, because of the matchup we saw last week, right? Like Hill, Burrow, Hill, Stafford, Hill, Jimmy Garoppolo,
Hill.
So that's. I mean, I think that's a great way to flesh this out for folks. You know, Hill, Justin Fields,
Hill.
So I would agree with that because.
Justin Fields, Green Bay's defense,
right? How Chicago generally performs in Lambeau,
right?
So Hill, Cam Newton,
Hill.
Yeah, exactly.
It's close. I think that one's close.
Right. It's almost like the simplest way I would put it is if it's somebody that has generally been a quarterback one this year and there's no reason to doubt them specifically this week, you're probably not going to stick your neck out for Hill. But if it's somebody that you haven't been regularly starting all year, and then go with Hill because of what he can do as a runner. But I think you lay out the concern well. And with Alvin Kamara back, if Kamara collects all those touchdowns, then we could be like, picturing like the Monopoly and the Millionaire with his pockets pulled out, with looking for Taysom Hill. If he doesn't get, you're depending on touchdowns for Taysom Hill this week, I think, and not necessarily passing touchdowns. All right. Well, this, as the question to go in, this is a good one too. Matthew Wells, because we were just talking about that Green Bay Chicago game tonight. Will Aaron Jones save the squad today? General feelings about Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. Dillon coming up in some questions today.
Yeah, I love both of them today.
Yes.
I think both of them are solid starts for today. Now, I think the problem though comes in. I think Akeem Hicks is supposed to be back tonight, if I'm remembering correctly, so it helps out with Chicago's rush defense. But prior to, it's been more of a rushing attack against the Bears over the past few weeks. We saw James Conner just shake loose this past week for quite a bit, and also as a receiver as well. So if you're looking at that dual threat combo, at least that profile of a dual threat combo for a running back that we've seen over the past few weeks go up against the Bears, either of the two, AJ Dillon or Aaron Jones, like profile is great starts against the Bears tonight. And I'm really looking forward to that game, because I know, at least for the stuff that I do, so y'all know that I'm more of I look into the weather stuff. Yeah. And so I think it's supposed to be mid-20s tonight. Mm-hmm. So you're going to probably see the shots of, it's cold in Lambeau, all the other narratives that are associated with just football weather. And a lot of folks will probably say that, oh yeah, Aaron Jones, like AJ Dillon are going to be awesome starts. And they already are, but I don't think the weather is going to be the reason for them being solid starts. But I think with the way things shape up to be tonight, I'd start either of the two with confidence.
Yeah, I think so. I think we expect the Packers offense to overachieve tonight in general.
Mhm.
And remember, and this one's interesting to watch. We have a lot of divisional games this week, a lot of second matchups of divisional games this week. And then the first game, the Bears, that was the I own you game.
Yeah.
And Devontae Adams had 11 for 206 in that game. So I would think rational coaching would dictate, they would say, let's let somebody other than Devontae Adams, well, not let if someone's going to beat us tonight, it's someone other than Devontae Adams, you would think. But maybe the Bears just try the same thing again. Either way, I think it points to the running game. I think Matt LaFleur wants to lean on the running game. I would expect 35 touches between those two running backs, potentially 2, 3, even 4 touchdowns to split up. Remember, Aaron Jones is always good for a 3 or 4 touchdown game, like 2 or 3 times a year. So, yeah, you definitely want to have a chip on that Packers offense if you can. One other player I'm seeing come up a lot, because on one hand, you have it's Detroit's pass defense, but on the other hand, Denver's another team that would probably love, as long as it is a winning game script for them, they are willing to feed Javonte Williams. They are willing to feed Melvin Gordon. By the way, real quick, as an aside, as I go off on tangent after tangent, Javonte Williams, folks might feel a little bit conflicted here after what he did last week versus Melvin Gordon coming back. Do you want to help them resolve any conflict they may have about whether to start Javonte Williams this week?
There should be no conflict regarding starting Javonte Williams this week. I mean, at the very least, he becomes like the 1A in that offense.
Yeah.
And a 1A against Detroit, who it was bottom 10 in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back. We've also seen him be like the better receiver out of the two. So even if there's the slight concern, which Dr. Jene seemed to indicate regarding Melvin Gordon and the hip injury, even if there's any sort of slight concern about that injury for Melvin Gordon, what are we really thinking? Like, if they get into the third quarter and this game is just completely, I mean, if it's wrapped up for the Broncos, you really think they're going to continue to feed Melvin Gordon at that point?
No,
I don't. So no, I have zero concerns about Javonte Williams, because at worst he's at the 1A in that group, and if they wind up jumping out to a lead, I can see that just touch split just start to completely, diverge over the rest of the remaining course of that game, and it winds up being in Javonte Williams' favor quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of fear missing out with Javonte Williams, and that's another one. Don't overthink it, kind of like Nuke. But maybe Teddy will throw the ball 20 times in this game, assuming Denver's defense take care of business, which they should, considering Detroit doesn't have TJ Hawkinson or DeAndre Swift. What about Jerry Jeudy? I'm assuming Jerry Judy's at the front of the line if we're looking at the targets in the Broncos offense, but does he get to the front of the line when we set our lineups?
Yes, but more as a wide receiver 3, that sort of thing. Just given his usage towards the middle of the field. I mean, he has been mixing in more on slot snaps between him and Tim Patrick. I think those are the only two, and maybe Noah Fant if you're probably stuck in a situation like looking for a tight end that you have to start at least one. So if you had some issues there, I guess those are the 3 that I'd feel the most comfortable starting if you had to start anybody in that passing game. So yeah, Judy's fine for this week, just given the matchup. Given this small sample of targets that we've seen over the past couple of weeks start to shift more his way. So yeah, I think Judy's fine. I just wouldn't put a ton of confidence in that passing game at this point, given it's not just because it's Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, we like Teddy, but it's
the guy. Yeah.
Like Teddy, the guy. It's just that things haven't really shaken out for him here, whether it's the injury or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I think Judy's fine, but I would rather prefer pretty much any of the other guy, like MVS.
Right.
Somebody that offers some punch to your lineup if you wanted to throw him into a wide receiver 3 slot.
Yeah, with Jeudy will get 5 or 6 targets. The question is he 4 for 80 and a touchdown, or is he 3 for 46? 3
for 46. That's the way I lean.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, on the Javonte, and we haven't even talked about Ezekiel Elliott. Jack Neubauer brings in a question from Facebook. Javonte or Zeke or Godwin. Now, this isn't on PPR, and Chris Godwin, I'm assuming, is the Godwin here. But so we have the Javonte optimism on a less than full workload because of Gordon, and then we have Tony Pollard. If he's going to play, he's not going to play much. But Zeke ain't exactly 100% himself. So this is a good one. This is why they pay us the big bucks, Chris. How should we guide Jack Neubauer with basically a choice, I think, between Javonte Williams and Ezekiel Elliott?
So if we're thinking about this from a standard perspective, I'm thinking touchdowns become the most relevant piece of the equation here. So if you are talking about Chris Godwin, if I'm remembering correctly, slot receivers against Buffalo haven't done too terribly well I think Godwin, out of the rest of the pass catchers for Tampa Bay, has the toughest matchup. I'd probably go Chris Godwin, Javonte Williams. No, take that back. Wait, what were the three again?
Zeke, Chris Godwin, and Javonte Williams.
Yeah, probably go Javonte Williams, Chris Godwin, and then Zeke. I think that would be the three. And
it's funny how you do this, Chris, and different things give you clarity or cloud your mind. And every time I get close with Zeke, if it's somebody in his vicinity, it doesn't have to be a number of touches or even touchdown equity, Chris, just somebody that we feel good about playing, like a Javonte Williams, like a Green Bay back. Zeke may get all the touches today, but I don't know what that's going to be worth.
It might not matter, especially
it might not matter.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm not exactly that confident in Zeke. What I am confident in is if you join us on Sunday mornings, you get Dr. Gene's advice, you get Chris Allen's advice. And by the way, any worry about weather in your neck of the woods for that San Francisco-Cincinnati game?
No, everything looks fine for us. I know that there was literally a tornado warning down southwest Ohio, and like all the stuff that was happening like down through Kentucky and all that. Thoughts and prayers like out to those folks.
Oh yeah,
all the destruction. But yeah, it looks like everything here like sunny, pretty sunny up here in Dayton this today. So no weather concerns like for the Cincinnati game.
Yeah, definitely. I know Mayfield, Kentucky took a direct hit, and so yeah, folks, it's something to think about. Like if you win your fantasy football championship and you want to break off a little something for folks might need it at a tough time down there in that part of the world, in all the parts of the world here in the United States today. It's a big football Sunday. We're happy to help you enhance your enjoyment of that, and hopefully enhance your enjoyment of that with some wins. It's a win for us every time you join us. We love your support here. We appreciate it. Again, if you like what we're doing here on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. The amazing turnout here in week 14. We always want to do the best for you folks because you're so